establish a new covenant.
Jesus had a mother. She gave birth to
These
Jesus.
things Muhammad was ignorant of when he called Jesus the Messiah. Another problem of the Islamic Messiah, ladies and gentlemen, is that according to the Qur'an, this Islamic Messiah brought an Injeel, a gospel. This gospel, ladies and gentlemen, is unknown to history. Nobody knows about it. There are no fragments of it. Nobody quotes it. Nobody writes in favor of it or against it. History is completely silent, ladies and gentlemen, as to its existence. And yet the Quran claims that it does exist, that it did exist. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, we have the writings of Paul. We have the writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John in the New Testament, ladies and gentlemen. If we are supposed to believe that the Islamic Isa is a real person in history, why do they give him a title that they don't understand? Why do they ascribe to him a book to which there is no evidence of his existence, ladies and gentlemen? No, ladies and gentlemen. A quarter of the world is ignorant, ladies and gentlemen. A further problem of the Islamic Isa is that the Allah of the Quran promised that the Islamic Isa and his followers would be victorious over their enemies until Judgment Day. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, the Muslims admit that Pauline Christianity won against the Islamic Christianity, that won, ladies and gentlemen, against the Muslim followers of Isa. What is this telling us? This is telling us that Allah fails in his promises, that Allah lies to his followers, ladies and gentlemen. Why, oh Muslims, did the Muslim followers of your Isa, why were they beaten by the holy apostles of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Why, Muslims, do you believe in a book that you cannot find? Why, Muslims, do you give a title to Isa that you do not understand, ladies and gentlemen? And yet we Christians understand the title Messiah. We understand why we give it to Jesus. We have the copies of his Gospels with us, ladies and gentlemen. We have, ladies and gentlemen, the victory of the church over the Roman Empire, over all false religions, ladies and gentlemen. Another problem with the Islamic Jesus is that the stories of his miracles as a child are copies of heretical Christian groups from the 3rd and the 4th century, like the Proto-Evangelium of James, like the Arabic infancy gospel. Allah plagiarizes these stories and adds them to his Quran, ladies and gentlemen. Allah is a plagiarist and a liar. Ladies and gentlemen, Allah failed in his promises. Allah failed to preserve his book. Allah failed to explain the title Messiah. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, the stories we find in the gospel do not have antecedents in other literature. Ladies and gentlemen, the stories of the Gospels are original. The Gospels demonstrate an understanding of why Jesus is called the Messiah. The Gospels survived, ladies and gentlemen, when the Injeel did not. These are historical problems with the Islamic Jesus that these Muslims cannot defend, ladies and gentlemen. Another problem, ladies and gentlemen, with the Islamic Jesus is the historicity of the crucifixion. The crucifixion of the Lord Jesus Christ is identified in Josephus, in Tacitus, in Suetonius, in Clement of Rome, and in countless other sources that are both Christian, Jewish, and pagan, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Bart Ehrman, a skeptic of the Christian faith, points out that the one thing we can be sure of about Jesus Christ is that he died on a cross. But, ladies and gentlemen, Allah the great unknower, Allah the unknowing, didn't know this. He denies the crucifixion, ladies and gentlemen. He denies it, and by denying it, presents himself as a deceiver, because he deceived Josephus and Tacitus and Suetonius and Pliny the Younger and Clement of Rome into believing that Christ was crucified, ladies and gentlemen. So let me ask the Muslims, if Allah lied to the world for 700 years, how do you know he's not been lying to you for the last 1400, ladies and gentlemen?
Because Jesus worshipped.
So these are the problems. One, the Muslims called Isa the Messiah, but they cannot explain why Isa is the Messiah. Two, Muslims say Isa brought an Injeel, but they cannot find that Injeel. Three, Muslims say that the Jewish followers of Jesus would be successful over their enemies, but history shows that the one holy Catholic Church was the victor over its enemies. Four, Allah admits to lying to the world against all the evidence of history that shows that Jesus was crucified. Ladies and gentlemen, the fifth problem with the Islamic Jesus, yes, JC, there's more. The fifth problem is that the Qur'an says Isa went to the Jews and brought the Injeel to the Jews. But yet the Qur'an commands the Christians to follow the Injeel, not the Jews to follow the Injeel. Why? If Allah sent Jesus to the Jews to bring an Injeel to the Jews, why doesn't he command the Jews to follow the Injeel? I challenge any one of you Muslims, any one of you Muslims Show me the verse in your Qur'an where Allah commands the Jews to follow the Injeel. He doesn't, because Allah was confused. Ladies and gentlemen, Allah was mixed up. Ladies and gentlemen. And so, but we as Christians have none of these problems. We know why Jesus is called the Messiah. We know why and what message he brought in the Gospels. We know that he came to the Jews and he sent his holy church into the world. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no cognitive confusion in the Christian story,
3 million people,
but there is cognitive confusion, ladies and gentlemen, in Islam. And notice, the Muslims have no answer to any of the points that I've raised. Ladies and gentlemen,
do your research.
the sixth problem, ladies and gentlemen, with the Islamic Jesus is that it cannot explain the surrounding facts that point to the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
You rule by the sword.
Tell me, Muslims, if Jesus was not crucified, why did Paul convert to Christianity after persecuting the church? Tell me, Muslims, if Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead, why did anyone claim to see the risen Jesus? Ladies and gentlemen,
End of time.
this is an indisputable fact of history.
He's gonna knock down the
No historian denies the fact that people claimed to have seen the risen Jesus. Amongst them, Peter, James, Paul, Bartholomew, Barnabas, Thaddeus, and the others, amongst 500. And yet, the Islamic Jesus cannot explain these post-mortem experiences, ladies and gentlemen. Another problem with the Islamic Jesus, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Islamic Jesus did nothing to deserve the enmity of the Jewish community. What do Muslims claim about the Islamic Jesus? That he taught the belief in one God, that he taught and confirmed the Torah, that he brought an Injeel that confirmed the Torah, ladies and gentlemen, and that he changed some of the food laws of the Torah. Let me be clear, ladies and gentlemen, nothing about that Jesus would be worthy of death. But yet, the Islamic sources say that the Jewish authorities sought his life. Why? They believed in one God. They confirmed the Torah. And changing the food laws would just make you a bad Jew in need of education, not a heretic worthy of death. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Jesus is a coward. A coward. The Islamic Jesus said that one of his youngest followers should die in his place. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what the Islamic story is about Jesus. Why? Why did he have to die, ladies and gentlemen?
Didn't die.
Allah could have saved him, saved Jesus, without the need of anyone dying on the cross. And yet Muslims have to come up with an explanation for who died on the cross, ladies and gentlemen. And another problem with the Islamic Jesus is that they don't agree. Some say it was an enemy of Jesus. Some say it was the follower of Jesus. So who was it? An enemy or a follower? Do you know his name or don't you know his name, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you for admitting that I'm telling the truth, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for admitting that I'm telling the truth.
Jesus didn't die.
So, let's be clear, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, Pastor.
For you to believe in the Islamic Jesus, you must believe that Allah doesn't understand the title Messiah, that Allah can't preserve his book, that Allah forgets who he gave the book to, that Allah can't protect his prophet without killing someone else, that Allah can't keep his promises to ensure that his followers were successful like he promised them that they would do, that Allah can't get his story straight about who died on the cross, that Allah, ladies and gentlemen, can't satisfactorily explain why Paul converted to Christianity, or why Christians started honouring Sunday as a holy day, or why, ladies and gentlemen, Christians believe in the post-mortem experience of Jesus Christ in the first century, ladies and gentlemen. But let us be clear, we Christians have none of these problems. Our Jesus makes sense of the history. It makes sense of the evidence. It is internally coherent in the terms that it uses and why it uses them, ladies and gentlemen. And there is not a Muslim in this park that can defend the Islamic Jesus against the Jesus of the New Testament. Thank you very much for listening.